the cost of turnover. I do think
Yeah.
that needs to be looked at in an organization because I think sometimes we get short-sighted.
Have you had any situations where you've had people who were just disconnected from that this generation that we're dealing with right now?
I think that I try to state there's always a generational shift, but then there's also different people within generations. But I will say
Yep.
this is that there's a company, the first firm that I ever worked at when I came out of college, uh, it was a firm that we called it literally the firm. The reason why is nobody ever left. And I got to tell you this, it was so neat because they had a 4% turnover rate. And this was a multi-billion dollar company, and they had a 4% turnover rate. So you got to imagine multi-state. How do you do
Wow.
that in a multi-billion dollar organization? Well, what they did, and I'm not saying necessarily we would do this in your organization. I'm just saying this is getting in front of a problem, is they would go survey the market every year. And then what they would do is they would increase to meet the market every year. And then what they would do is then increase that more than the market by some percentage. Well, they understood that turnover is a heavy cost to an
Yeah.
organization, and they did the studies on the reduction of turnover, which is cost efficiency, and they said we'd be better off to increase their pay than to have the turnover. So and so they did a lot more for, I always joke with people. I said, look, they had pie eating contests at a gym, and they had a lot of other things that they had going on. They used to have a cart that they would roll between the cubicles with like muffins. I mean, it was just a really cool culture, but nobody ever left because the benefits were so good the way they treated people. That is important to look at the cost of turnover. I do think
Yeah.
that needs to be looked at in an organization because I think sometimes we get short-sighted from the executive seat and say, well, they haven't asked for a raise, and so I'm keeping my margins where they need to be, not looking at that. That eventually turns into turnover, which then has a huge cost to the organization. So I do think that it's sometimes we follow the herd versus being in front of
Mm.
those types of movements. And we something that happens in dental that doesn't happen in a lot of other industries to this level is in dentistry, we have this commodity type mindset. And what I mean by that is people go and they share the exact same information. They will ask somebody who's failing at something, what are you doing? And do the exact same thing as them. And so it's like that doesn't typically happen in a lot of other areas. And so, I always tell doctors, don't ask the person who just lost 5 hygienists what they're paying hygienists. Like that's not who you ask. It's the person who's attracted 5 hygienists who you should be asking. So sometimes I think we just need a better set of questions, but we
Yeah.
also need to step sometimes outside the industry and say, hey, what are other organizations maybe outside of the industry doing that we could maybe borrow from? Because right now retention is important. Yes, vision is so important. Leadership, and look, no matter how driven you are, how much of a great leader you are, no matter how passionate you are, people are going to leave. And that's just the hard truth of it. And sometimes you can't even understand why they would leave because you're like, do you ever understand how great we are? But they
Mm.
will, and it does happen. However, I do believe as business leaders we can get in front of this. And I think
Yep.
we can do a lot to it. I think what we have to do is not have herd mentality and not
Mm.
commoditize information, but be unique thinkers within the space.